completely free running highway, yet we have to queue up at a traffic light system. Can you imagine how much extra energy this big truck or lorry on the left is using, having to stop on a downhill slope to then accelerate away? I don't get this. I just don't get it. Makes no sense. Good morning guys, Monday the 6th of November and day 18 of my Australian daily vlogs. I'm getting some of my voice back this morning, and that's because I finally had a decent sleep last night. I was in bed by 11 PM, which hasn't happened for a long time, and although I should be feeling better and more rested this morning, I'm actually feeling a bit more lethargic because I've finally had the chance to shut down. But I'm sure I'm going to perk up after I've had my second coffee of the day. I already know it's a fantastic car because I had one back home in the UK for a week, but revisiting it has just made me realise how special it is. And although the regular, if you can call it that, G80 M3 and M3 Competition are already brilliant cars, the CS is just another level again. As you know, if you've been watching my daily vlogs, I did film an independent video with this M3 CS against the new M2, so keep an eye out for that on the channel. You now join me in a BMW i4 eDrive35. It's another BMW full electric car that sits just under the all-important $90,000 threshold. We'll stop and have a quick look around it, but in the meantime, on my first 3 minutes behind the wheel, it's very, very pleasant. But I'm looking forward to running this today and bringing you along for the adventures and giving you a bit more information along the way. A bit like with the Lotus Emira that I've featured on the channel. This isn't a full review, it's just my first impressions on this particular car. Hello beautifuls.
Hello.
Big shout out to my brother and Rani for letting me pop around several times now to do my washing, because although I've been living in a hotel, the one thing you don't have access to is a washing machine, and this has been a saviour. It means I get to play ball with the doggles. Ready? Drop it. Drop it. Right, let's have a quick walk around of this i4 eDrive35. Firstly, the colour, it's skyscraper grey, which is the same colour as my very last 7 Series that I used when I was a chauffeur. So I have an attachment to the colour. I think it's very neutral and it suits the 4 Series. The i4 is based on the 4 Series Grand Coupe, so it's based on a combustion engine platform, which essentially is the current 3 Series platform. And I've already tested the M50, which is the hot version of the full electric i4, and the eDrive40, and I actually came away from both of those cars preferring the eDrive40. Personally, I think the M50 is just too much. It's too stiffly sprung for the UK, and it's almost too fast, because with EVs, I talk about it a lot, you have all of that performance available all of the time, and sometimes it's just a little bit too much, whereas the eDrive40 I found to be just right. But this eDrive35 will hopefully suit an Australian customer due to the fact that it sits below their $90,000 threshold. In fact, one of these base price before any option packs will set you back $86,000. And I've just checked, in the UK, one of these will set you back £50,000. With today's exchange rate, that's $100,000. Something else that BMW Australia were quite keen for me to point out is that by the middle of next year, so the middle of 2024, this eDrive35 will be one of 6 available EVs by BMW that will sit under that $90,000. There'll be 2 iX1s, 2 iX2s, an iX3 and this i4. It has a 70 kilowatt hour battery, which gives it a claimed maximum range of 430 kilometers, which is about 265 miles. It has an electric motor on the rear axle only, produces 210 kilowatts, which is about 285 horsepower, and 400 newton meters of torque. Those figures mean this 2-ton i4 will do the 0 to 100 kilometers per hour sprint, or 62 mile an hour sprint, in 6 seconds, which is definitely quick enough. This particular press car has the non-option 18-inch wheels. I think they look really good. I love the chunkier sidewall on the tyre, and to me that says that it's going to have a better ride quality. It's not pretending to be an M car, so why not stick with the smaller wheels? They also give you a slightly better claim range because smaller wheels, slightly smaller tyres, less rolling resistance. Let's have a quick look in the boot. Because it's based on a 4 Series coupe or Grand Coupe, you've got the slanting rear boot. It's essentially a 5-door, so you've got loads of load access there, nice big wide opening. And with those seats folded flat, if you're a cyclist or you carry surfboards over here in Australia, I'm sure that's going to be really useful because it's a very usable bay. There's a big storage bin under here, which is handy for charging cables and valuables. There's a couple of different parcel shelf options, but it's a really nice and usable loading bay. And in fact, if you remove this parcel shelf, then you can load this up quite high. Where the 4 Series Grand Coupe or the i4 falls a bit short is rear cabin space. And not just rear cabin space, I talked about this on my channel before. The rear doors are very small, and when you get in here, it is a bit tight for space. The windows are very slim, the rear seats are very upright, and there's not that much headroom. I certainly wouldn't fit in here with too much comfort. So just bear that in mind. It's not the biggest in the rear cabin. But once we get up front, it's lovely. I mean, it really, really is a nice cabin. Obviously, you got the curved display in there. We've got a few telltale signs letting us know that this is an EV. So we've got the blue circle around the BMW roundel. We've got some blue eyes and various graphics on the curved display. And we've got the blue start-stop button down there. But otherwise, once again, it looks and feels exactly like a 4 Series Grand Coupe. This particular one has a sunroof, which is great, but I'm guessing, I don't know, I'm guessing that is part of an optional package, but you'll need to look that up yourself. And when we open the bonnet, oh, frameless doors, we didn't talk about those, front and rear. Pretty funky, but make sure when you close the doors, you don't close them using the glass, you close them using the metal bit of the door. Open this and ta-da! Unfortunately, there's nothing to see under here and there's no extra storage space. It would be nice if we could utilize some of this space for those cables we looked at in the boot, but there is no extra space in here. And that kind of comes down to the fact that this, once again, is on the combustion engine chassis and not on an EV specific chassis. And while we're on that topic, it is a shame that they didn't get rid of this drive shaft tunnel that runs through the car, but obviously isn't being occupied on this electric version. We've also got 3-zone climate. I wonder if that is standard. And we've got 2 USB-C charging ports back here. We've got one in the front and a USB in the front as well. So plenty of modern charging ports. And before we take it out on the road, obviously this is no longer for fuel, it is for your charging. Right, let's jump in and take it out on the road. Switch to those cameras. Similar to the iX1, it's been a joy to live with for the past couple of hours in Melbourne, in traffic, in very hot weather. It's 32 degrees out there today. The summer has finally arrived. My last couple of days in Melbourne, and I'm actually getting some summer conditions, and It's really nice to jump in here. The air conditioning is blasting straight away, and that is a benefit of electric cars, whether it's in the summer you want air conditioning, or in the winter you tend to get the cabin warmed up a lot quicker than an equivalent combustion engine. As talked about on the outside, its acceleration figures are very impressive. Do you actually need a car that's any quicker to 100 kilometers per hour or 62 miles an hour than 6 seconds? Probably not, if we're all being honest, especially if you're using it as a family car or as a commuting tool to get from A to B. So it never feels like it's underpowered. And as I've talked about a few times in my EV reviews, not just BMW, when you're in an EV, you've got all of that power and torque available straight away. So if I mash the accelerator now, I would get maximum output power, so 285 horsepower and 400 Newton meters, like that. Whereas if I was in a combustion engine car with those figures, I wouldn't have that available at the crack of a switch, if that makes sense. Unfortunately, in the 4 Series Grand Coupe, and therefore the i4, I do struggle with the driving position. You might see on camera that I am sitting very, very high. The seat is in its lowest position. For whatever reason, the H point, which is where the seats essentially bolt onto the chassis with these Grand Coupes, tends to be a lot higher, and the cabin seems to be lower. So the curved display in all of the dashboard is maybe 2 or 3 inches lower than it would be if I was sitting in an equivalent 3 Series. When I dropped off the M3 CS earlier on, yes, I'm sitting a little bit lower again in that because of the carbon buckets, but all the displays are up here, whereas in this car they're all down there, and I definitely feel like I'm sitting a little bit high. So if you're much over 6'3", 6'4", just consider that. Make sure you go and sit in one and check it first, because they're not as good a driving position as the equivalent, let's say 3 Series, which is bizarre because it's the same chassis, but it's definitely got something to do with the shell and the packaging that means that you do sit up quite high. Very, very little cabin noise and tyre roar. Once again, I'm sure that is helped by the fact that this has the non-option 18-inch wheels. Ride quality is really, really good. It's just a pleasant place to cruise around in, just like that iX1. The iX1 and this particular model are almost identically priced in Australia, and it makes for an interesting choice, because although the iX1 should really be a little bit smaller, at least on paper, in terms of its practicalities and its storage in the cabin, its rear bench space, the feeling of space as well in the cabin of that iX1, I reckon if you've got a family, that's probably still going to be the better way to go. Whereas if you're a couple, or you use this car predominantly to commute to work, etc., on your own, then this is probably going to be the better proposition. Certainly looks sportier. It does look more expensive. You wouldn't think that a 4 Series Grand Coupe like this would sit well under $100,000. Something else I must highlight and talk about is this steering wheel. Although it's not as nice to look at as the one that's in my M3, the actual rim of it is so nice and slim, and I know I bang on about that a lot on the channel, but it just adds so much more feel. This is like a 992 Porsche rim. We're up to 80 kilometers per hour. Once again, there's absolutely no wind noise, no tyre roar. It's a really pleasant place to sit. It's regenning now as we come up to the traffic lights. As with, I think, all BMW electrics, you've got 2 main drive modes. So drive, where it actually feels more like a combustion engine car, so you use the accelerator. When you come off the accelerator, it tends to coast and use minimal regen unless you get on the brakes. And if you pull it back towards you again, then you get B, and I think that stands for brake, and that maximizes the regen. And when you're in B, you can actually drive the majority of BMW electric cars with the accelerator pedal alone. So as you come off the accelerator pedal, it brakes using regen. As you go back on it, obviously it accelerates. It takes a bit of getting used to, but I find whenever I borrow a BMW electric or BMW I do put it into B, because it's lovely just using the single pedal. Obviously if you need to stop in an emergency, and you still use the brake pedal to the left, but it is nice around town just using that single pedal. So my foot is about 20% into the pedal now, whereas normally it'd be about 5% if it was just throttle. There's no one behind. If I slowly bleed off the throttle, it starts braking for me using regen, so I'm charging up the batteries, and therefore you're kind of maximizing your range, which, as we all know, is very important in electric cars. I hope this non-review of BMW's i4 eDrive35 has been useful to anyone that's potentially looking at buying one. It's a nice piece of kit. It drives really well. You wouldn't know that it was essentially built from the ground up to be a combustion engine car, and that BMW have electrified it, because that's kind of what they've done, because it all feels very complete. Aside from things like the drive shaft tunnel, I wish they'd got rid of that, so rear seat passengers, if you had a third one back there, had a bit more leg room and foot space. And also things like the bonnet, yeah, it would be nice if we could store at least the charging cables under there, because they're heavy and they do take up a lot of space. But otherwise, there's not really too many other compromises. Time to get this back to BMW Australia. Oh, I think that's the M2 we had a couple of days ago. And that is what I'm picking up next. 740i. I now have the keys to this 740i for the next week, and I'm planning to do lots of things with it, including taking it on a very, very long road trip. Before we jump inside, we'll have a quick walk around. It's a busy road here, so excuse the noise of the traffic. As you probably know, I'm not the biggest fan of the styling on the new 7, especially the grille area, but once you look past that, it's not too different to the older one in terms of aesthetics. I do like the rear end, I like the lights, etc. And when you get inside, well, it's extremely luxurious. Personally, I'd prefer just to have leather in here. It certainly brightens up the cabin. We've got a massive sunroof, and the blind and that is currently closed. All of the tech you could ever imagine in here. And then when we get in the back, well, the luxury continues back here, as you'd expect. Looks extremely comfortable. We've got a beautiful Alcantara headlining. We've got this massive cinema screen that does come down when you turn it on. We have these digital phone style controls in the door, you name it, and this car has pretty much got it. It also looks like the passenger seat on the left hand side of the car almost lies flat, so there's a section that comes up there. We'll have to play around with that over the next week or so. It would definitely make for a very good chauffeuring car, as I'm too familiar with my 7 Series over the years. Anyway, let's jump in it, get back to the hotel, because I've got some editing to do. Back at the hotel now. I'm gonna sit down for a couple of hours, get some editing done, head out and find something simple to eat for dinner before hopefully getting another decent night's sleep. I'll see you tomorrow for another vlog. Cheers.